Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to look at three things. The first one, I think we already done previously also, how to get user input. Then we will be looking at decision making with Java. There are different ways of making decisions. And the last one is loops. So with that, we conclude the basic programming algorithms. Remember, I said there are 5 things we learn when it comes to programming. Input, then output, sequence, selection, and looping. So with that, we'll be concluding our basic programming principles. And then we'll get into some advanced topics from next week, things like object orientation and whatnot. We'll be looking at saving information into file, reading from files. And perhaps you can also now start looking at your project, your final year project, if you are planning to do this in Java. We will also start talking about interactive programming, where we will bring in buttons and panels and stuff like that, and see whether we can bring in these components to have a online GUI based application, and then do some programming to interact with it. Okay, so that's the plan. Now, talking of the user input, let me share some slides first, and we'll get down to some coding. If you notice in Java, we use the class called scanner, right? There's a reason why we call it a scanner, because the keyboards are generally designed to scan the user input. So here's a typical 4x4 keyboard, which you use it for, all kinds of simple experiments. So I thought this will be a good one to understand how a normal keyboard works. So here, there are 4 columns, C1, C2, C3, C4, and then 4 rows, R1, R2, R3, and R4. And if you notice, in the cross point, we have installed a button. So when you press the button, for example, this one, it connects C1 and R1 together. Okay. So what the computer does is, it first sends a signal on C1. It turns it high, meaning it will give a current to go through the C1 column. So the C1 is now turned on, right? So the information is, or rather the signal is going out from C1. And then the computer will be reading the rows. So computer is outputting to column and reading from the row. So there is an output and an input. Output is C1, C2, C4. Input is R1, R2, R3, R4. So first it checks the R1. Is there a signal coming in? Since this switch is not touching the points, no signal coming in. And then it goes to R2 and see whether there is any signal coming in. No signal there also. Then it goes to the R3 and see whether there is any signal coming in. Again, no signal coming. It goes to R4, no signal coming. Then it goes to column 2. And then signal comes down column 2. And then it checks R1, R2, R3, R4 like that. And when it comes to column 3, you notice we have pressed the switch here. Okay. So when you press the switch here, column 3 current is going through the switch and to R1. Okay. So R1 is now getting a signal. And we know C3 is also having a signal. R1 is having a signal. That means this switch is pressed. According to our keyboard, this looks like the number 3 is pressed. Yeah. So that is how the computer detects which key is pressed. Now, if I have a direct map, this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And here we have A, B, C, D. And then we have the star here and the hash here. Okay. So a very simple keyboard principle to understand how scanning works. So in Java, we use a class called scanner. It's specifically designed to get user input, which is coming from a package called util package or utility package in order to handle our user input. And I hope you remember this code. We need to import our Java util scanner library. Without it, we cannot use the scanner. And then this is the line where we created an object called myObject. You can give any name you want there. Sometimes I use the word in because it is for input. Sometimes we use myObject, whatever. You know? And then we create an object with new scanner. And to that, we are passing on the standard input, which is the keyboard in this case. And in order to get something, we use the next line method of the myObject. And then we are supposed to store that in a variable as well. So here in this example, I'm reading a line. It can be numbers, names, anything for that matter. The entire line we are reading, and we store that in a variable called username, and that variable has a type of string. And in this line, we are basically displaying that on the screen. So if you notice, we are asking enter username. So we are basically displaying a message asking the user to enter a username, and then we are waiting for them to enter something, and then we display it here. Username is, and then we display it there. Okay. Now we use, the other day we use next int, that is to get an integer from the user. Now in the previous example, we use next line, that is to get a string value from the user. But there are so many others we can use as well. If you're expecting a Boolean value, true, false, you can use the next Boolean. If you're expecting a byte that is from 0 to 255, you can then use byte. It can be double, float, but those are decimal values. You can have an int for whole numbers, long, short, also whole numbers, and line is to read the complete line. Okay, so that's on getting the user input. I hope you've already seen this code previously, so nothing new here. Next, let's look at how Java makes decisions. Okay, so when you say decision making, we are asking a question, and then from that answer, we go in two directions. If the answer is true, we go in one direction. If the answer is false, we go in another direction. Okay. You need to remember the decision is based on a Boolean expression. What does that mean? Boolean mean now whatever the expression we have, the answer has to be Boolean. It has to be true, false. Only then we can make the decision. I think if you remember last time we were trying to figure out the odd even algorithm, and it didn't work when we brought in the module operator inside the if. That is because the output is not Boolean. We are getting an integer output, and it didn't work. So I had to do the calculation outside the if statement and then come and check the Boolean value. So to start with, the decision making, there are actually two mechanisms. One is where we only do something when the condition is true, and we don't care for the condition where it is false. You can do that also. So we only have one sort of code block where the decision is true, right? The other way is where we have both sides. Now, this example, if you remember, we had we were detecting whether the person is a child or an adult, and that's what we did, right? So we have an if statement, we have a code block, then we can have a then statement, then bird, and then we have another set of code there. That is how we did the if else as well. So if you look at the flow chart, this is how it looks. You are asking a question, that's the condition. If the answer is true, we go here. If the answer is false, we go here. Okay. Now we can also combine the if into multiple else and ifs if we want to. That is also possible. In fact, we use this in a very common programmatic problem where we are trying to figure out grades as per the marks. So if you have received, let's say 0 to 35, you're failed. So 35 to 50, you're passed. Likewise. So 50 to, let's say, 65, you have a distinction. Likewise, you can have a range of values there also. We can try that out and see how it goes after this part is over. There is also a concept called nested if statement. Nested means one inside another, right? So now, for example, here I have a if statement. Inside the same code block, I have another if statement. So in order to go to the second if statement, the first one must be true. Then only it goes to the second statement. Okay. Let's finish this and then we'll go to the switch statement. Okay, so basically, we want to do grades and points. So what I'm going to do now is to create a new project. And we are trying to figure out which grade to give according to the marks the students have received, right? So let's call it, so this is week 5. A marks and grades. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I need to have a plan to say like, how am I going to give these marks and grades? So, so let me paste the plan here, right? So if somebody has, let's say, 0 to 29, that person get a fail grade. If the person has 30 to 34, I mean, we can either give an English letter or a number as a grade. So here we are given grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this can be grade A, B, C, D, E. Or the other way around. E, D, B, A, right? So whatever it may. So the universities have a different system of doing this. Well, I guess the concept is the same. So let's say marks and grades. So what we'll do here is, first of all, we'll have a integer mark where we can try our algorithm and see whether this is correct. So I'm going to have 20 as the starting point. So our understanding is that we need to keep testing the numbers, isn't it? So to test the numbers, we can go either way. We can start from 0 to 29, or we can go from 100 to 100 and come down, right? Now, in this case, we can see 50 to 60 is this. So we can also have another one where we say more than 60. You can say A plus, right? Something like that. So we assume there are a couple of assumptions. We assume the mark will be either, actually mark is between the 0 and 100. We don't want to test whether it is beyond 100 or less than 0. So we assume it is between 0 and 100. And we can start by this. If, right, here's my code block for the first if. So if the mark is more than 60, right? In fact, I can also do this. I can say string grade, right? Currently, it has no values. So here I can say if the mark is more than 60, the grade is a star. Very simple. So we start from the highest order. So I come to the else part when the mark is less than 60, isn't it? So I need the else here. If the mark is less than 60, I come here. Now I need to do another test when it is else, right? I need to see whether it is more than 50. Else if mark is more than 50. That means less than 60, but more than 50, which means I'm in the range of 50 to 60. In that case, the grade will be A, isn't it? Right? Okay. So, oh, let me jump here. Anyways, and if, oh, there is a little jump here. If I try to organize the marks. All right. Then we come here. We're going to have another else for the if statement we have there. So else if. Okay, here's another code block. Now we are above 50 and 60 goes to A. Now we are going to check whether if mark is more than 45, right? If so, the mark is going to be B. And similarly, I need to keep adding the else ifs for the rest of the block. So here we are going to check if the mark is more than 40. If so, it's going to be C. And again, else if another block. Is the mark more than 35? Then it's a D. And another else. Is the mark more than 30? E. Now, by the way, here I don't need another if for the last one, because the grade is, the final one is fail, right? So in this case, if you notice, first we are checking to see whether the mark is more than 60. If the mark is more than 60, we give the grade of A plus. If the mark is more than, more than 60 is A plus. More than 50 means less than 60, but more than 50. Then it's A, B, C, D, E. Now I'm trying to test it with number 20. So I should get E, isn't it? So let's try this. It's running. Oh, I don't have a statement to display the grade, isn't it? Build successful. So here I need to have a system out, isn't it? We can say your mark equals plus mark, your grade equals grade. Okay. Oops. Now if I run, I should get the message out. And technically I should get fail. 20 should give me fail, isn't it? Correct. So let's try 30. As per this, I should get E grade, but it is still giving me fail. That is because I am checking whether it is more than 30. It should be more than or equal to 30, should give me E. Now let's try that. Okay, I'm getting E here. So looks like I had to do the same thing for the others also, isn't it? So if I have 35 here, I should get a D. Yes, I'm getting it. So I'm going to put equal sign here as well. So more than or equal to 50 here, right? Okay. Okay, so if I get 60, I should get A. Yes. If I have 61, I should get A plus. Fantastic. So our code is working, right? So what you tried is called the nested if statement, one if inside another if. There are other ways to do this also, but this is one example where we can use the nested if statement. There is also a better looking switch if then else mechanism. When I say better looking, it looks much better, but it works exactly the same way like any other if then else statement as well. Because coding has two purposes. One, the code has to work, it has to function. Number two, remember the objective of programming is to communicate somebody about how you solve the problem. Communication. Okay. So when you use the switch statement, it looks much neater, much better than loads of if then else statements, right? It works in a very similar way to a switch, a typical switch that we use. So you're asking a question here, just like the if statement, but we have a mapping or matching case statement for the input value here. So if the input value is equal to case 1, we go and run code block 1. If the input value is equal to case 2, we go and run the code block 2. So likewise. Now we also have another very interesting one called the default case. Now default case is something called catch all, meaning if the input doesn't go to any of the cases, then it goes to the default case, right? So if you look at the example here, we are taking in a variable, and then we are matching it to A, B, C, D, F, right? And then depending on that, we keep showing the answers outside. All right. So we can combine this into our previous code also, or maybe we can write a new code just to try this as well. So I would rather have a new code for this. So I'm going to switch back to NetBeans, and I will create a new project. So let's call it W05B. Switch case project. Actually, I don't need a package, so I'm going to delete that. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is to have, let's say, a grade which comes as what we did previously. Yeah, let's call it A plus maybe to start with. And then we are going to have a switch case statement. So it goes like this: switch, and then a code block. Okay. To the switch, we have our variable, which is grade in this case. And then we keep switching to various grades. How do we do that? Well, we have a case statement for each one here. So we can say case A plus, then a colon. Then we can have whatever statement we want. So I'm going to say system out.println. In fact, you can have another string here and then put the output outside as well. Say well done, right? And let me try the default case here. Default. Okay, now since I have a ace plus here, I should see well done. So let's try this and see. Yes, it says well done. But we are also getting better luck next time. I don't need that, isn't it? I need to show well done and stop there. In that case, we use another keyword called the break keyword. It shows the message and it breaks the switch case statement. Now let's have a look. All right, now it's good. So well done only. Now, if I have something else, let's say, for example, only the A, now what happens? Since there is no matching case, I should get the default answer. Yes, it is better luck next time. Very good. So I can, in fact, have multiple cases to do multiple sort of switch cases. So I can say if it is A, I can say good job, right? I can have for B, Now let's see. I should get a good job this time. Yes, I'm getting. Now, what if I want for B and C both to get a good attempt? So let's first try B. Okay, I'm getting good attempt. Now, what if I want for both B and C good attempt? In that case, I need to have another case here, like this. So now let's try B first. It says good attempt. Let's try C also. There you go. So for both B and C, I'm getting good attempt. Anything else, I'm getting better luck next time. Okay. So this is how you use the switch statement. You see, it's a very neat way to use it rather than having this multiple if-then statement, which is going inside one another. It's sometimes it's difficult to understand what is going on here. Whereas here, it's very neat. We can see, okay, there is one variable which we are checking for A plus, A, B, C, and everything else. So this is the switch statement. Now there is also another interesting one called the singular operator, right? Where sometimes we just want to test something and then give an output quickly without going through a complex if then else statements. So in this case, we use two symbols. The first is the question mark, and then we have the colon. So we can maybe do a quick check, for example, whether the number is odd or the even. Remember, we were doing that earlier. So we can rewrite that with this is called the ternary operator, right? Or the conditional operators is an extension of what we did previously. So let me switch back to our code editor and try this guy as well. Okay. So by the way, now I'm not getting any user input here. So you can replace this with the user input later. All right. So I'm given the chance of testing it manually. Once you're okay with that, you can replace that very easily with the custom user input and then do the try. All right. So similarly, I'm going to have a number. Let's call it n, say number 4. And then we can have it as a odd even detection. Like this. Let's call it Q equals N mod 2 question. Oh, I have not mentioned what Q is. Let's say it's a string. I should put a bracket here. Right, let's try this out. 4 is even. Correct, isn't it? So let's try 5. We know 5 is an odd number. So let's try that out. There you go. All right. So the way we did it is correct. And if you remember previously, we had a if then else statement in order to do the same thing. In fact, I had to do this in a separate line and then bring it on board here. Right. So this is a very good way to do a quick checkup on certain things. And remember, if this looks confusing, don't use it in the beginning. Just leave it out. So if there are certain things confusing to you, don't use them, because that will only have more problem to you. So when you understand it properly later, then you can start using it. These are shorthand methods. Sometimes if it is confusing, the best thing is to skip for now, and then you can come back to it later. So that is the ternary operator. Which brings us to a new topic today, that is on loops. A loop, there are other words for this as well. We call it repetition, we call it iteration. We mean the same thing, doing one job multiple times. That is called a loop. So in Java, just like many other languages, we have standard 3 ways of loop control: for loop, while loop, do while loop. Then we also have another one called the advanced method, where we can go through a collection of items. Now, if you know, there is a collection of items like a array or a object class, object array, or something like that, where each element is same, then we can use another advanced loop mechanism as well in this Java looping. Now, to understand looping, let's say, okay, let me switch to Paint. Let's say I want to display a number set from 1 to 5. Okay, I want to show numbers 1 to 5. So in order to do that, I need to have certain logic going on in place. I also need to have other variables in place also. So first, I need to have a variable, perhaps, let's say call it max, for example. Max should be 5 in the beginning, because that is the number of times I want to run it to. Then I also need to keep a count of how many times I have done. Now for that, I'll start with the n, right? So in the beginning, I have not done anything, so it is going to be 0. I haven't done any time, so it's 0. And I want to do it 5 times, so that is max. Okay, so this is my setup in the beginning, right? So we also, by the way, need to have a set of columns so that I can keep a count of what is going on here. So I'm going to have something like, say, let's start with the n here. And so n goes from 0 up to 5. And then we need to do a test, right? So max also here. And we need to make a test and see whether n is smaller than max. That is a test we are doing. And we also need to keep incrementing the n one after the other. Okay, so in the beginning, n is 0, max is 5, and here here n is 0 smaller than 5. Is 0 smaller than 5? Yes, isn't it? So what we want to, let's say, do is display hello. So since 0 is smaller than 5, I'm going to show hello once. Okay, and then we go to the next line. Actually, in the next line, we want to make n equals n plus 1. So we increment n to 1. Max remains the same, right? Max remains the same. And then we are testing, is 1 smaller than 5? Right? Yes, 1 is smaller than 5. Okay, here we go. Another hello. Right? And again, we increment n by 1. So this time we are saying n is 1 plus 1, which is 2. And this is 5 still. And is 2 smaller than 5? Answer is yes. So we are going to put another hello. Next time, this becomes 3. Max is still 5. Here we are looking, is 3 smaller than 5? Yes, indeed. So I'm going to have another hello here. And this time again, we are testing. This is 4. Max is 5. So is 4 smaller than 5? Answer is yes. So we have another hello here. And next time we go here, 5. Max also 5. Is 5 smaller than 5? Well, the answer is no. And then we stop running this loop. So if we look at how many times we show hello, exactly 5 times. If I am to write the pseudocode for this, I will write something like this. So in the beginning, max is 5, n is 0. So here I will say, while n is smaller than max, okay, have a code block. So this code block works only when the n is smaller than max. So here we are printing hello, 1 point. And then we are incrementing n equals n plus 1. That's it. So if you look at the code, we start with the max 5 n0, and here we are saying while n is smaller than max, print hello. After we do that, we increment the n by 1. So now n is 2. Sorry, n is 1. So we are here. So again, we are testing, is 1 smaller than max? Yes. Again, print hello. Increment n, go back to the while. And the last one, where n is 5, we are testing here, is 5 smaller than max? No. Then we stop printing. Let's try this code ourselves. So I'm going to create a new project. So let's call it the while loop. Right. So here we need int max equals 5, int n equals 0. So you're saying while n is smaller than max, do something. And n equals n plus 1. Let's see whether it works. Yes, it is working. In fact, I can also have n here, right? So that we can see the n being printed also. Yes, it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We haven't started with 1 because n was 0. I could start with 1 also if I want to, but I kept it simple. Right? Then there is also another, I would say sometimes rather easier loop. Now that is called the for loop, where we don't need to manually increment or manage these loop variables. Okay. Now, of course, we need the same variable set for this to work as well. It goes like this. There's a for and then bracket and curly bracket like this. Inside the for, we need 3 pieces separated with a semicolon. The first one is our loop variable. In our case, it is n. So I'm going to say n equals 0 here. I don't have to say int because it is already created. Next one is our test. In our case, it is n smaller than 5. Third one is called the increment. Now this n equals n plus 1 can be written as n plus plus as well, like here. Okay. So I need my system out here. Remember, we do not need the system, the n plus 1 here because we are already doing that here inside. Right? Let's say hello from while loop. Let's say from for loop. There we go. While loop has 0 to 4. For loop also has 0 to 4. Exactly the same thing, but sometimes for loop looks neater than the while loop. Of course, there are different situations where we use the while loop, where we cannot use the for loop. In that case, we will use the while loop. For example, when we don't know how many times you're running the loop for, then you can't run the while loop there. You have to go with the, I'm sorry, you can't run the for loop there. You have to go with the while loop. Okay. That is also, let me add another new line here. There is also another loop type known as the, sometimes we call it repeat until loop, or we call it for loop, where the testing is done at the end. So essentially, if you're looking at the loop types, both while loop and the for loop, we ask the question in the beginning and then we go inside the loop, isn't it? There is another type of loop where we, okay, I need to go back to the presentation, where we do the testing at the end. Now, you see here in a loop, we have a condition. If the condition is true, we run the code block. If the condition is false, we come out of it, isn't it? That's what we do with the while loop. Whereas the for loop does exactly the same thing, but in a very simple manner, like this. Right? So here's an example. So the do while loop is where we do the checking at the end of the while statement, like in here. You see, we do the code block. Now, if you in fact compare what was happening here, we have a condition, then we have a code block, isn't it? For while loop and also for loop. But if you look at the next one, do while loop, we call it, where we do the job and then we do the testing. There are situations where we may have to show something to the screen and then wait for the user to enter something. So in that case, the best choice would be do while loop. So let me rewrite our code again using do while loop. Now for that, I am going to copy these. Of course, I have a problem of variable setting here. So I need to get these two variables. In fact, int n is important here. It's called the do while loop. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the while with the bracket and go and post it down here with a semicolon at the end. And here I have the word do. That's all. Right? Let me see whether this gives us the same results. Oh, well, should I say do while? Okay. Right. So the last one we have for today is called the enhanced version of the loop. That is coming as part of a part of the for loop. Okay. So I'm going to copy this text again. I'm writing all that in one file so that it's easy for you. Okay, enhance loop. So what does this mean? This means you can pretty much go through any object you are throwing at this. Any object mean not just a variable, but a collection of variables, right? The word is collection. So I can have a multiple of something. Let's say, for example, an integer. So here I can say int. Since I use n, I'm going to use m. Ooh. Sorry, wrong bracket. Right. So it is a something called integer array. Let's call it marks. Right. All the marks are there. Now to display that, you can use a for loop, just like the for loop here. Or there's a smarter way to do that. So let me. Right. So here is the magic happening. So here I need to have the type of the variable and say one mark and then marks. Now this is an interesting way of doing things. So okay, in here we are getting one mark at a time. By the way, we don't have an n here, so I have to say mark. No, one mark, and then display the value there. So first of all, let me run this and see what is going on here. There we go. It says enhanced loop 32, 54, 34, and 32. Correct. You see, it's taking one at a time and going through the loop. Did you also notice I don't have a loop control variable, right? I don't have an n here. So that's how it is designed. Now, sometimes when you have a large collection of information, it will be very easy for us to run this loop like this, where we don't care how many items are there. We load it from the database or from the user, and then we just run it like, you know, default processing of an array. Our loop types are over now. Let's see how we can control the loop. So to do that, let me get another one here. I'm going to put all that into the same sort of code file. Yeah. Loop control. So let's have two new lines here. I'm going to copy the for loop for this. Now, say for example, let's say stop at 3. Now, when I run this code, you will notice it is showing all 5. Right? So it's showing all 5. I want to stop at 3. When it is 3, I don't want to go, I don't want to show anything. I want to just stop there. I only want to show 0 and 1 and 2. How do I do that? So in that case, I can look for, I need an if statement here, and then I can use a word here to stop my code. The word here is break, that will stop. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for whether n is, say, equivalent to 3. Right? It says stop at 3. So let's run this now. There it is, 0 and 1 and 2. Actually, in this case, I'm not showing the number 3 as well. If you want, we can change this here. So here I show only 3 and I'm not showing the last 2. There may be situations where I want to skip number 3, like I want to show 1, 2, 4, 5, not number 3. So let's try that as well with the same loop. Let's say not stop, skip 3. Okay. So you're trying to skip number 3 here. So what you're doing here is same story, but this time without saying break, we'll say continue. Let's try now. I have an error here. Oh, here, the end. There we go. Now see here, I'm stopping at 3, 0 and 1 and 2, and then no 3, no 4, no 5. Whereas here, I have 0 and 1, 3 is skipped, but I have 2 and 4. Okay. Now that brings us to the end of the loop. So what did we cover today? We looked at how user input is working, and also how the scanner function or scanner class actually working. Then we looked at decision making. There again, we looked at various ways of taking decisions. That is if then, else, and then also switch case available. And the last technique we learned was how to do something repetitively. So here we learn about 3 loops: while loop, for loop, do while loop. And then Java also gives us something called the loop, advanced loop system, enhanced loop. We tried that as well. And then at the end, we looked at how to control the flow. You can skip something, or you can stop at a certain index number, either way. Okay. So that's all I want to cover today. Any questions?